All right, let's dive into a real puzzle, a paradox that sits at the very heart of modern Iraq. We're talking about a nation that is literally floating on a sea of oil. I mean, it's one of the most resource-rich countries on the entire planet. And yet, a quarter of its own people are living in poverty. So how on earth is that possible?
It's the central question, isn't it? How can all of that immense wealth buried deep underground just fail to translate into a better life for the people living right on top of it? Well, to answer that, we've really got to peel back the layers of a super complex story, and we're going to start with the most visible scar of all. And this right here lays out that contradiction perfectly. On one hand, you have immense wealth. Oil money makes up pretty much all of the country's exports. The income should be absolutely massive. But on the other hand, you have this deep, persistent poverty, with about 1 in 4 people struggling to get by. The wealth is there, no doubt about it, but it's just not reaching the people. So where's the disconnect? Well, that first layer of the answer lies in the devastating scars of war. To really get a grip on Iraq's present, you have to look at its very recent and very violent past. The war against ISIS didn't just cost lives, it completely shattered the country's foundation. It all just exploded back in 2014. ISIS swept in from Syria, seizing huge chunks of territory, including major cities like Mosul. The response had to be enormous. A coalition of nearly 80 countries came together to push them back. And even though the war was officially declared over by 2017, the country was just left in ruins. And the human cost was immeasurable. And get this, even years after the fighting stopped, over 2 million Iraqis are still internally displaced. I mean, these are people who can't go home. Why? Because their towns, their jobs, their entire lives were completely destroyed. That creates this massive, ongoing humanitarian crisis that just simmers under the surface. And the financial cost, it's just as staggering. $88 billion. And that's the minimum estimate, just to rebuild what was lost. For a government that was already struggling, that is a nearly impossible amount of money. And that, well, that brings us to the next layer of the problem. So the war created this massive hole that needed to be filled with money. And Iraq has the money, right, from all that oil. Well, this is where the story gets even more complicated. The very resource that should be its salvation has, in many ways, become part of the curse. This chart really shows you the country's total dependency. The entire state is basically running on oil. It funds 85% of the government's budget. This means that when global oil prices are high, things are okay, they're stable, but the second they drop, the entire country is teetering on the edge of collapse. It makes the economy unbelievably fragile. So, okay, even with that fragility, oil still brings in billions and billions of dollars. And that leads us to the most obvious question in the world. Where is all that money going? If it's not rebuilding the country and it's not helping the poor, what's happening to it? And here's your answer. Out of 180 countries, Iraq ranks 157th on the Corruption Perceptions Index. Look, this isn't just a little bit of graft here and there. We're talking about systemic corruption on a massive scale. It puts Iraq among the most corrupt nations on Earth. The system itself seems designed to siphon wealth away from the public. This quote from the National Interest really puts it all into perspective, doesn't it? This isn't just about greed. This theft had direct, catastrophic consequences. Money that was desperately, desperately needed to fund the war, to help displaced families, to rebuild shattered cities. It just vanished. Okay, get ready for a gut punch of a number. Since 2003, it's estimated that as much as $300 billion has been lost to corruption. Just let that sink in for a second. That is more than 3 times the cost of rebuilding the country after the war with ISIS. That money could have completely transformed Iraq. Instead, it was stolen. So we have the deep scars of war, and we have a system crippled by corruption. But what does that actually mean for the average person just trying to live their life? Let's connect these huge, big-picture problems to the daily struggle on the ground. For young people, the future looks incredibly bleak. While the overall unemployment rate is around 11%, youth unemployment is a staggering 34%. Think about that. More than 1 in every 3 young Iraqis can't find a job. And this is happening even as oil production is rising. It's creating an entire generation with no prospects, and, understandably, a lot of frustration. And the failure to deliver even the most basic services is just stark. Take electricity. Over $37 billion has been spent, but the national grid works less than half the time. This forces people to rely on expensive private generators just to keep the lights on. In the oil-rich city of Basra, the main water supply is unfit to drink. And housing? The country needs 3 million new homes, but the government is only building about 25,000 a year. The investment is happening on paper, but the results are just not reaching the people. You know, all of this leads to a really critical concept called the social determinants of health. It's this idea that your health isn't just about doctors and hospitals. It's about having a safe home, clean water, and security. It's about the conditions you live in. In Iraq, the failure of these basic systems is creating a massive public health crisis. Diseases like cholera have even started to reemerge. Poverty isn't just a lack of money, it's the lack of a functioning society. So we've got a devastating war, a broken economy, and systemic corruption. But it's really how these forces all interact with each other that creates this inescapable trap for the country. What becomes crystal clear is this vicious cycle. It goes like this. Conflict shatters the nation's foundation. This creates mass displacement and a huge bill for rebuilding. But the oil money that's meant to pay that bill, it gets siphoned off by corruption. That corruption then stalls any real economic growth, so no new jobs are created. And the result of all that is failing public services and a crisis in daily life that traps millions in poverty. You see, each problem just feeds the next. And that leaves us with the final and really challenging question. Iraq has everything it needs to be a prosperous, stable nation, buried right beneath its feet. But with a devastating legacy of war, deep-seated corruption, and a failing state above ground, what will it finally take to connect that incredible wealth to the well-being of its people? What's it going to take to finally break the cycle?